Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Emmitt Sevores Show. Today, we're going to be talking about the Packers and the Lions, two teams. One that I thought was going to be vying for a bottom three pick in the NFL the last time we talked to Chris Perfett, and then another team that I had as a Super Bowl contender. Here they are, both at 8-8, vying for that 7 seed in the NFC playoffs. Chris, how are you doing, my friend?
The one that was going for a bottom three were the Packers, right? It was actually the Packers. It
It,
was it
it
was
was
it was
Yeah, you know what? Towards the middle of the season, it looked that way. It certainly looked that way. Of course, I was wrong on both of those. The Packers have looked until recently not super great, and even on this winning streak, I don't think that they have looked super spectacular. The Lions, on the other hand, have completely turned their season around. So let's start there. They started off at 1-6, then they beat the Packers in Week 9, 15-9, in a incredibly ugly game that I rewatched on NFL Network last night and remembered all the chaos that ensued. The AJ Dillon fumble that rolled out of bounds that and then there was the Samori Toure fumble that I think it was a Lions player recovered just out of bounds. It was just chaos from start to finish. Classic Packers Lions. But now the Lions, here they are, back all the way up at 8-8. They need a little bit of help to get in. Needing the Seahawks to lose to the Rams, and then they need to obviously beat the Packers. Chris, how did we get here? How did we get from 1-6 to 8-8?
very carefully. I guess it starts with the firing of Aubrey Pleasant, which it really shouldn't. The Lions were and still are a bit of a mess defensively. But as much was being made when they were 1-6 about their offense being one of the highest scoring in the league, it was also that the defense was also giving up the most points in the league. And it was coming down to when they started out, it was the Eagles game, the Commanders game, Vikings, Seahawks. And in those four games, you saw these one score losses that the Lions once again shoulda, coulda, woulda in a lot of places. And then the rails all completely fell off when they played the Patriots and got shut out by Bill Belichick and whatever monsters he brings up there to Foxborough. I don't even know who's even on that team anymore, other than a man who's not quite the offensive coordinator, but is the offensive coordinator and sucks at his job. But nevertheless, that became a very awful stretch for the Lions because they were facing a lot of injuries at the time, and at the same time, their offensive scheme really wasn't. I mean, their defensive scheme, wasn't really helping them much in a lot of these games. The Lions like to play very aggressive, but they also had some key personnel that were either missing or out of place in a lot of those. So they move on from their defensive backs coach, and that next week they pick up the win on the Packers, and that starts a run where the defense manages to start getting better stops and the offense doesn't really let up. I think one of the key things too is that we look at that front end of the schedule now, and we see a lot of teams that I think a lot of people expected them to walk over that happen to be very good teams. The Eagles are obviously one of the best teams in the NFL. The Vikings, in spite of their problems, still racked up double-digit wins this year, and they've clinched the NFC North. The Seahawks have a chance to go to the playoffs right now. The Patriots, no comment. And then the Cowboys and Dolphins. Again, both those teams are kind of choking up down the stretch, but at the same time, they are very potent teams with potent offenses that just made the Lions play. They got into the back end of their schedule, and things started to ease up a bit. And they made a few changes, and that's when the offense really started to take off, and they could play the games they want to play. And they've gone now, what I want to say, it's 7-2 down the stretch. The Panthers loss was really embarrassing, and it really hurt their playoffs chances. And just in general, you give up 500 yards from scrimmage. It's absolutely brutal. But they have looked the more confident team now. They've been able to get rid of a lot of the demons that were choking on them early in the season, and they've just learned to really put more schematic, just game plan wise. They seem to trust their offense a lot more to just do the things that they need them to do, even in some games where it's looked ugly and scatterbrained. They've just been able to pick up wins.
Yeah, and I've kind of noticed because I mean I've paid close enough attention to the Lions. Like they're the one team in the NFC North I don't hate other than Green Bay. I root for the Lions if they're not playing the Packers or if it doesn't affect the Packers
I hate that, by
necessarily.
the way. I hate
You
that.
do? You
I
do?
hate that. I had someone at work try to sell that to me, another Packers fan, and I told him I wish you wouldn't, because it's demeaning. It's absolutely demeaning to the hatred. You wouldn't do that to the Bears, so why not do that to us? We are a divisional rival, and trust me, we hate your ass.
No,
we hate
and
everything about you. We hate your existence. We hate your throw Rogan ass quarterback. We hate the shares that you guys claim to sell. We hate everything about it, and we want that hate returned. And so, hate and do it honestly. It gets rooting for the Lions as a divisional opponent is very demeaning. That would be like the Yankees rooting for the Yankees before the Red Sox started winning and be like, you'll get there one day. I'm rooting for you to pick up some wins. Nobody would ever take that in their right mind. So why do Packers fans feel like this has been something I've been on because we put up a TikTok, and Packers fans on TikTok genuinely don't understand why Lions fans hate them.
oh, I get it. I 100%
That incredulity just makes us hate you more.
Yeah, no, and the reason I've always been at least a little bit like infatuated with the Lions is at least growing up when I was a little kid. My favorite animal was a lion, so I was like, that team's pretty sweet. But looking at it, they don't have I think that the Lions have never had, for the most part, other than Ndamukong Suh, a hateable player. Like Matthew Stafford's always been a guy I can root for. I could root for Megatron way back in the day. I rooted for a lot of those guys. I still currently, the hardest part of this week for me is that I have to root against Jamal Williams because I'm sure, as you guys have found out, I love Jamal Williams and he's fantastic. But
Jamal's been on our podcast twice. He insisted on coming back one time. He wanted to ask us questions. He's a very goofy person.
He's awesome.
One of the few people in Detroit who can vibe with him as far as anime. So he's been a fantastic. He's really, ever since Hard Knocks, been kind of that heart and soul for the Detroit Lions teams. He's racked up a lot of touchdowns this year. Granted, it's how they use him. He's not exactly the feature back, but he's always there to, when you just need to punch the ball in, Jamal's there. But I mean, people saw it in Hard Knocks, and let me tell you, that's all true. He is the heart and soul of this team. He bleeds for this team very hard. He just wants to win out there, and I think everyone follows his example in the locker room.
Yeah, he's been a guy, and again, the way that the Detroit Lions this year have used him is exactly how I wanted the Packers to use him this entire time, in terms of, because they for a long time there, they had him as the primary back and Aaron Jones as the backup. They were the same draft class, so they were kind of fighting for touches, but everyone knew Aaron Jones, for the most part at least, was better, especially yards per carry. He was just a little bit more explosive, but for whatever reason, they had just not used him as, the human battering ram that Jamal Williams can be and how physical he plays. But the Lions this season, for the most part, I hate when people say oh, they're better than their record, but the Lions are better than their record is. You look at a lot of those losses, obviously week 1 versus the Eagles, the Vikings game, granted, I won a large amount of money with the Vikings covering the spread on that one. But the Lions outplayed them in that game. Same thing with the Seahawks. It was one mistake by Jared Goff that truly cost them that game on the pick 6 with Tariq Woolen. And then the Cowboys game, score be damned, it was a lot closer than, Jamal Williams doesn't fumble on the goal line there, and we're probably having a different conversation. Maybe the Cowboys still win it, but I highly doubt it.
Even that Eagles game got very close at the end. The only one score game I feel like the Lions really weren't in was probably that Dolphins game. They kind of came back a little bit in that game, but even the Bills game on Thanksgiving,
you were in control the entire time.
They had a chance late in that game to I think on that final offensive drive, they had a chance to actually put it out of reach for the Bills, and instead, the Bills held them. I think they kicked a field goal, and then of course, Josh Allen gets one good pass.
Yeah,
that's all it takes.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like I jinxed you guys on that one. I was 100% up, this one's over, and then it didn't go super well. Yeah, Josh Allen had the one really long throw. I think it was to Stephon Diggs, if I'm not mistaken. But the Lions are truly, I think they're a better team than their 8-8 record would give you. And, as Aaron Rodgers said, I know that he's the bane of a lot of Lions fans' existence. They're not the same old Lions. They're not. This is a different team. And I think that they have as good a chance as truly anyone to go into Green Bay and win. On the Packers side of things, their success has been a lot more recent than the Lions have. The Lions, again, 7-2 in their last 9. The Packers 4-0 in their last 4. They really hadn't been playing great football, and I honestly could still make the argument. Other than that Vikings game, I don't think they've played a whole lot of great football. The Bears game, they were down by 9 or 10 late in that game and found a way to come away with it. But again, you're still playing the Bears, and then you played the Rams with Baker Mayfield. You played a concussed Tua, and you were down 10 until Tua threw a bunch of interceptions. And then the Vikings game, it's like that was a very predictable loss, I think, by the Vikings. Anytime they get any sort of resistance. It's all about
who you're playing in this time of year, too. Like, it is a lot about how you're playing down the stretch, but it's also a matter of who you're playing. When I look at who the Packers have played, they've played the Bears, the Rams, the Dolphins, the Vikings. All those teams are kind of going southbound right now, or have been southbound for a minute. I know Lions fans are kind of pinning their hopes on Baker Mayfield and the Rams kind of making that turnaround and beating the Seahawks. Draft pick position be damned. And then the Bears, and like the Dolphins and Vikings have all been starting to choke their way down the stretch. And I don't think anyone I don't even think the Dolphins are currently in a playoff spot right now.
They're not. They
not.
don't even control their own destiny at this point. I think they need.
Yeah.
Granted.
They've removed the ping pong table. What do you mean they don't control their own destiny? They've removed the ping pong table.
Yeah.
Don't you know that always works in the NFL? You remove the ping pong table. Let people know that you mean serious business. This is actually the second time they've removed the ping pong table this year. And that time when they removed the first time, oh, right, that's right. They lost the next week.
Yeah, they don't control their own destiny, but they just need to beat the Jets, who are starting. I think it got announced today. I think it's Mike White, maybe. No, it's Joe Flacco.
Are we
Joe Flacco versus
spinning this roulette wheel again? Jesus
and
Christ.
then I think it's Joe Flacco actually who's getting the start. And then they would need to win that game against Joe Flacco, and then they would need Buffalo to beat New England, which I think probably will happen. So it's realistic, but with how they've played recently.
But nobody expects the Dolphins. Yeah. I mean, to a lesser extent, no, I don't think anyone even expects the Vikings to really make any noise in these coming playoffs if it does happen, right? Like, I know everyone's pointing to Minnesota's record, but this has been a sad fall from grace for them.
Well, I think at least NFC North-wise, I think Packers, Lions, and Bears fans have all at least rallied a little bit around like the Vikings. Yeah, your record is what it is, but you're not that great of a team.
Yeah, no, they have a minus. They lead the division with them, and they have a minus 19 point differential. Differential usually is a good indicator of how good you are, just without even going into any kind of advanced metrics, which the advanced metrics do back up that the Vikings are not a good team right now. But even without going with any advanced metrics, I've always been told point differential, you want to get a quick, good look at who's good going into the playoff. Point differential is probably the best way you can go. And who are the best teams right now? The teams everyone trusts. Bills, plus 157. Eagles, plus 127. Cowboys, plus 145. Minnesota Vikings, minus 19.
Exactly. And you really, for all of it, it reminds me truly of like that 2019 Packers team. It went 13-3, but everyone knew they were going to go up against San Francisco and get crushed. It was a foregone conclusion that that's how their season was going to end. But yeah, the Packers this year, although I think they're playing better and they've come a long way. Christian Watson had a huge stretch there, but then over their winning streak, he hasn't looked really fantastic. He has 14 catches, a touchdown, around 150 yards. Since that like 4-game outburst that he had, but he hasn't been necessarily as special as I think a lot of people had hoped, at least down the stretch. I think this game that we'll get into is insanely losable by the Packers, and one, because I don't think the Packers have been as great as everyone's seeming to make it down the stretch. There is this narrative that Aaron Rodgers is carrying him. He's not. As much as an Aaron Rodgers fan, I would love for that to be true, but it's just not true. He hasn't been good in these past couple of games. He's been a game manager. Like, I'm pretty sure over these past however many games, if you flipped him and Jared Goff's stats, Like you would think that's what you would expect, but Jared Goff has looked like the better quarterback over these last 4. But moving into the game, and before we truly get into this, this is again, this might you might not like this, but I'm rooting for the Rams, not because I would love the Lions to get in the playoffs. If the Seahawks get into the playoffs and my team loses, being from Seattle, I will turn into the Joker. It is not going to be good. I truly need the Rams to win here. I have a podcast that I'm on with all Seahawk fans. I'm going to get my feelings hurt. I'm going to be sitting there, hoodie over my head. Not very good. So I'm rooting for the Rams with you. However, what is your take, before we get into this, what is your take on the whole scheduling debacle in terms of the Seahawks being early, so then, if they win, the Lions have nothing to play for? I keep seeing this narrative being pushed by a lot of Seattle people. Oh, the Lions aren't going to play super hard. As someone who covers this team, what is your take on that?
That's really stupid.
Thank you.
That's all I really need to say. That's really stupid. I think this idea the Lions won't play really hard. Do you know nothing about Dan Campbell? Do you know nothing about what we have seen from 2 seasons of him, plus a Hard Knocks, plus everything that comes out of that man's mouth? Do you not believe that this is like somehow like the coach that just, no matter what game it is, he just doesn't care? He doesn't even know probably that the Seahawks Ram things even matters. I mean, he knows, but that's not going to affect him at all. And to be honest, even if the Seahawks lose, don't tell me if the Seahawks win, don't tell me the Lions won't just, play light. They want to kick the ass of the Packers too. Like, record, implications, all of that does not matter to a Dan Campbell team. What matters is you are in front of him right now, and he has Jared Goff under center, which doesn't sound like the threat that it should, but he has all these insane weapons and an offensive line, and Jamal Williams and Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown, a literal sun god, and he is going to try to just tear you apart. He doesn't care that that the Lions might not even be playoff eligible before then. He wants to beat the team that's right in front of him. This is a man that once upon a time did a commercial for the Dallas Cowboys to sell season tickets, and in that commercial, he tackled a horse. Dan Campbell, in cowboy pads, tackled a horse or bucked a bronco, something. I'm not even quite sure. You can find this on YouTube. But, like, this is the man you're dealing with here. This idea that, we all saw the quote from Ron Rivera last week, right? They didn't even realize he got eliminated that he could be eliminated from the playoffs. This idea that everyone's scoreboard watching and will just throw in the towel if they can't. These are football players. They're not fans. Stop thinking of them like you think of yourself as a fan. Stop thinking of them as being like this weird emotional min-maxing of, well, if we can't make the playoffs, we might as well, make sure we maximize our draft position. No, they're competitors. They want to go out there and kick someone's ass. And they will absolutely play hard here, even if they are eliminated by the Seahawks. This was the right move, by the way, because this would have been on at the same time. And to be honest, this is a much better game to have on as your Sunday Night Football versus whatever it would have been. Like, the Lions haven't been on national TV at all. This is a season-ending game in Lambeau in January. It's going to get the cackles going of everyone on national TV because they love their cold weather games. And it's a rivalry that seems to always be here at the end of a season for no good reason whatsoever. The Packers and the Lions are always playing in the final week of a given season. Like, this is the right move, and the Lions, I will tell you right now, they will not care if the Seahawks defeat the Rams. The fans might. The Lions themselves will not.
Thank you. That's what I've been saying all week, but because I'm a Packers fan, I'm biased. That's just what you wanted. The other game that they would have potentially put in primetime was Jaguars versus Titans, but we just saw Josh.
No. That's stupid. A, AFC North. B, like, it's the Jaguars and Titans. Like, what are you talking about?
Thank you.
What are you talking? I mean, no disrespect for those teams, but what are you talking about?
Yeah. And I've definitely burned any good bridges with Seahawk fans I had with what I was saying the second the schedule came out, because I was hearing the NFL was rigged for the Packers two-way. If the Seahawks win, it's rigged because then the Packers get an easy, quote unquote, easy Lions team. But if the Seahawks lose, then it's rigged because the NFL wants to win an in game. It's like, okay, then, if that's going to be your mindset on it, it's, again, I'm not even sure that they're going to, as a granted Seahawk hater, I'm not even sure they're going to beat the Rams. They've beaten Sean McVay twice in 6 years. One of them was on a missed field goal at the gun, and then the other one was on John Wofford, who had a chance to go.
I don't want to think too much on the Seahawks-Rams thing just because it's completely out of my control. I just know the Lions, like, they've never really, there's only been like one game where they really didn't come up and fight, and that was the Patriots game. But every other game they've been in, that Cowboys game was a house of horrors as well. But like, this is a team that has always, even last year, just fights like hell in every game. And they are the last team to be scoreboard watching for anything. It doesn't matter to them. It really doesn't. And even if you take the Seahawks element off the board, chance to remove the Packers from the playoffs? Are you kidding me? They'll take that.
Exactly.
In Lambeau to end a year? They'll take that. They will take that because they want to mount heads, because this is year 2 of a rebuild, and Dan Campbell doesn't care. And the Lions players, who have all taken after Dan Campbell at this point, with his infectious energy, with how he approaches things, with how he wears himself on his sleeve. This is a man who the Panthers ran like 300 yards on them. Sam Darnold threw something like 270 yards, and Dan Campbell went after them at them afterwards and said, "Great game. You really kicked our ass. Great game." That's who the Lions are. They want to fight. It's funny enough, we brought up Jamal Williams earlier, this idea of positive competition. It's something the Lions he used this term with us one time when he was on our podcast, this idea of positive competition. It's something the Lions really aspire to in a lot of ways. Like, and the Panthers game's a fascinating one too, because that's the only way I could see the Lions really getting embarrassed in this game, because it was very cold in Charlotte. That turf was in a really bad state. I don't expect that with Lambeau, but they just got their asses kicked in that game, and that's the only blemish on them so far. And it'll be fascinating to see what that comes down the stretch. But motivation, like, if anyone talks motivation this week, they're clearly not watching this NFL, or they know nothing about the Detroit Lions, which I understand. The Detroit Lions aren't on your first list to really watch, but I would think at this point people know who Dan Campbell is.
Yeah, and it's like, I think the first quote I saw from him, because someone asked him about it, I think at a press conference, and it's like, he's like, "This is a playoff game." It's the first question again. And I think that the attitude that you and a lot of Lions fans, reporters, we get to knock the Packers out of the playoffs. Like, I think that people are overlooking that because they don't know the rivalry or the hatred from Lions fans towards the Packers, or the Lions towards the Packers, or just the NFC North rivalry in general. It's like, you have to break it down, to them. It's like, oh, what if you had a chance to remove the 49ers from the playoffs? They're like, oh, we wouldn't slack off on that game. It's like, okay, well, that's basically what this is.
Yeah, I think some people are min-maxing on again, draft stuff a little bit too much. There's no scenario where the Lions just roll over.
And the other part of that is, like, the Lions, from what they showed last year, they're not afraid to move up to go get their guy. So I don't think that, being back a couple of spots is going to deter them from getting the guy that they truly want.
And by the way, they're also hoping that the Rams win, which will also remove that one particular, will knock down their other draft pick too. I think right now the Rams sit 6th. And it's kind of moving way out of Jalen Carter range, but that's completely fine. The Lions would much rather be able to say we made the playoffs in year 2 of Dan Campbell.
Exactly. But let's get into the game. Obviously, for the Packers, it's winning in. The Lions, it's knock the Packers out and get some help, and then you get in. What are you expecting from Detroit?
What I'm expecting is kind of more of what we've seen so far this year. They're a team that really, as much as they trust themselves in the trenches, they want to play in the trenches, but it's a team that fancies itself more on the offense these days. I know Lions fans are perpetually now in a terror that offensive coordinator Ben Johnson is going to get a job somewhere else. I think he's still way too young and way too inexperienced on his resume to really do that, but there's no denying what they've been able to turn Jared Goff and this offense into. This is, again, a quarterback that was a cast off 2 years ago, and he's playing like he's got revitalized energy to him. He plays very well in the pocket. He has a lot of very different weapons to go to. There are some routes run by Amon-Ra St. Brown that are just unbelievably impossible to stop him from running. And even the ground game gets involved when they can. Like, I know DeAndre Swift kind of has had his struggles this year, especially where it comes to his primary game, which is bouncing to the outside. But, when it gets rolling, it gets rolling, and they were able to get Swift involved, against the Bears. That's a bad front seven, but still, like, it's a Swiss Army knife of an offense. They're scoring touchdowns with their tight ends after trading TJ Hawkinson, just because they can put someone like Brock Wright out there, and Brock Wright can block and catch passes, rather than where you'd put TJ Hawkinson out there and you knew that TJ Hawkinson was trying to catch a pass. It's an offense that not only blocks well, especially in the run block rates that they're able to throw up, but they're able to move as an entire 11-man unit on offense. It's not just send someone out deep and hope Goff hits them. It's getting the pass protection. It's getting the run blocking. It's getting everything singing in order for their offense. And I think that's kind of become the identity of the team in that regard. On defense, it's a little more hodgepodge. I trust the front seven to do very well, not just in Aiden Hutchinson, who, in my opinion, unbiased opinion, doing national coverage as well that I do, Aiden Hutchinson is the defensive rookie of the year. I don't care about people saying, well, it's New York, they'll give it to Sauce Gardner. I don't care. Like, Aiden Hutchinson has, like, I think, if I'm not mistaken, about 8 sacks and 3 interceptions, and that hasn't happened since they started recording sacks back in 1982. Like, the man is very good at batted passes and sacks. And then you have someone like James Houston, which, if people don't know his name, James Houston, Jackson State, late day 3 pick. He really only comes in what the Lions called NASCAR packages, or not NASCAR packages. That's for more run stuffing stuff. But like, he comes in on third downs a lot of the times, and he has an ungodly amount of sacks for someone who doesn't play full games. And there was a lot of consideration when they drafted him. He had been playing, somewhere between linebacker and defensive end, and at Jackson State he had made more of his bones as an edge. Lions picked him up, tried to use him as a linebacker, but now they're kind of using him as that edge linebacker, and it's working. Him and Aiden Hutchinson are just getting through a lot of pressure, and it also helps. John Kaminsky does that as well. Their entire defensive line works very well around the edges, and they're even getting a little bit of help now from the linebackers. Malcolm Rodriguez kind of dipped off a little bit, but Alex Anzalone is probably the kind of defensive leader of this team. Where the Lions are struggling on defense is the secondary. Jeff Okudah started this year working very well, but I think that's really, he's been getting burned more than not lately, and they've had to rely on a lot of young cornerbacks and a lot of young safeties, because a lot of their veterans just frankly aren't making the kind of plays, or they're getting burned a lot. And that's the part that I think, if anything for the Detroit Lions, really hurts them in this kind of game.
Forgot to unmute myself. Yeah, on the Packers side of things, I think that the game that they played in Detroit earlier this year was obviously their worst game of the season, but it had a lot of really lasting impacts on their team. They lost Romeo Doubs. I think he spent 6 weeks around there out after that game. He got hurt on one of the first couple plays of the game. Christian Watson, he got hurt. I think he got a concussion in that game. He wound up getting a concussion. I think it was against Buffalo the week earlier, so he sat out for the rest of this game. Rashawn Gary tore his ACL, done for the year. Eric Stokes, I believe he had an ankle injury, done for the year. They lost, I think it was 8 different players due to injury in this game. And I think that this Packers team, although not necessarily great, I think they're a way better and a different team than the one we saw play against them or against Detroit earlier this year. Defensive wise, they've been a lot more aggressive. They finally started to press using Jair Alexander. They saw it last week. Obviously, they were doubling Justin Jefferson for a lot of that game, but it was finally a game plan that looked solid enough. Offensively, the personnel has completely changed. Their top receivers by the end of that game were Samori Toure, who doesn't play a whole lot. There was Amari Rodgers, who's no longer on the team. Sammy Watkins, who's also no longer on the team. And Aaron Jones, I believe, left with an injury towards the end of that game as well. They feel as healthy as they've been all year. And again, the consistency has always been the thing with the Packers down the stretch. What team is going to show up? And I think obviously the Lions have had that sort of issue in years past as well, not necessarily as much this year. But the Packers being at home especially, and I hate that it's an element in the game, but it is an element in the game. The Packers do indeed get calls at Lambeau. I know a lot of Packers fans like to brush that under the rug, but it truly does happen. You look at the hands to the face call. What was that, 2019? Against
something like that. I think there was one at Ford Field as well that it was like a phantom face mask call.
It was the one on the Rodgers Hail Mary.
Yeah. And I don't want to think of that.
Yeah, and so like it truly does happen where the Packers do get the whistle. I hope it doesn't happen, and I hate that it happens because I think all it does is bring a lot of hate to a team that granted a lot of people hate and they're looking for reasons to hate them, but I think it allows the game to, instead of analyzing the game, it's analyzing the refs. So obviously I'm hoping for no, horrible calls or anything like that. But I think the Packers truly now are a better team. They're undefeated in the Matt LaFleur era when they run it more than they pass it. I think they're 12-0 when they have more rushes than passes. And then even you look, Aaron Rodgers, although he still hasn't been great. He's not had another 3 interception game like he had in Detroit. And even watching it back last night, I just couldn't I couldn't believe all of the crazy stuff. It was the bounce off of, I believe it was I'm trying to remember what Lions player's helmet it bounced off of, got picked. Aiden Hutchinson picked him off as he was trying to throw it back across his body to David Bakhtiar. It was just a crazy, wild game. I think both of these teams, obviously record-wise, they're different teams than they were when they played earlier this season, which is why I think picking this matchup is way more difficult than it originally sounds. But I'm going to ask you to do it. Who do you have winning this game?
This is a rough one just because the fly in the ointment is that Panthers game. I've kind of seen what happens when the team gets into cold weather, but they've also had some cold weather in other places too that wasn't really much of an issue. And as many yards they gave up to Donta Foreman, who I know people were like, oh, you gave it up to Donta Foreman. Donta Foreman's good. But other than that, they've bottled up. They bottled up a lot of good running backs through these few weeks too. They bottled up Dalvin Cook. They stopped Justin Fields from running. I know he still got 130 some yards. I think most of that though came in the first couple quarters. But then after that, they forced him to throw from the pocket where they would just sack his ass repeatedly. And they stopped, the Jets run game. They stopped the Jaguars run game. I don't even think the Bills or the Giants really had much to say on the ground. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head how much Saquon Barkley ran for in that Giants game.
Wasn't a lot.
It was only 22 yards. So they like bottling up the run. They have big packages to stop the run, and they really like it because they don't have to rely on their secondary as much when it comes to stopping the run. So I think where it comes down to, it's a scary place to play for the Detroit Lions. The specters of years past hang over them. But this is not, as you say, as I heard after the Panthers game, and I know people keep bringing it back, it's not same old Lions. It's a very different team that has a lot of confidence about themselves, has a lot of positive energy about themselves, and this isn't the same Packers team because they've shown their weaknesses throughout there, and the fact that Aaron Rodgers really can't do Aaron Rodgers things, and he'll be affected by the cold too. I like the Lions in this game. I really do. I'm not being the homer at this at all. I try to do everything from a national side. I don't act like the fan except where asked questions about the fan. But when it comes to picking games and stuff like that, I am as neutral as all can get out, and I like the Lions in this game. I just think they have that kind of energy going about them. If you ask the fan side of me, I'm just glad that the fan me is glad the Lions are playing Aaron Rodgers. Because not that I care much for Jordan Love, but I just really didn't want any other kind of like a resurgence of the spirit of Matt Flynn. If you know what I'm saying. Like that was my dread coming into this game, is like, oh, maybe the Lions are going to have a playoff game on the line here. Aaron Rodgers is going to suck so much that Matt LaFleur is going to try it out Jordan Love again, and suddenly he's going to be the second coming. Like Matt Flynn, they've had their future secured, and that'll just feel like suck all the same. No, I'd rather, as the rational side of me says Lions to win. The fan side of me says I want to beat up Aaron Rodgers.
And I think that's so fair. He's been the NFC North for the most part, their boogeyman for the past whatever it is, 15 years. Obviously, there's been down years, and but he's owned the division for a while. The only team he really hasn't is Minnesota for the most part. But like Detroit and Chicago, he's had a lot of success against. Although Detroit has had the most success, I believe, out of them and Chicago. And Detroit, I think, is the team that I worry about. Like, I think every year the Packers play the Bears and they go down 7-0 and the Bears have the ball. And I'm like, yeah, that's just how these games go. And then, and then by the end of the game, the Packers are winning by 17. The Lions, truly, I have no idea how a lot of these games are going to go. I like the Packers in the game. I think that there is a little bit of bias on my side. And I'm trying to look at it from that national point of view. But I think that the Packers, it feels like a not same old Lions situation, but it feels like it is that like too big of a spot. And in my personal opinion, the Packers will obviously for their season's sake have to win this game. But with the amount that Aaron Rodgers has been talking this week about like being, no one thought we would be in this spot. It's like, you're not in.
Here's the problem. You're getting into what I would consider narrative takeaways, which are always good to write after the fact, but they're very bad for doing preview. You want to. I look at this game purely on a matchup standpoint. How are these teams going to match up very well? And for the Packers to really beat the Lions, they need Aaron Rodgers to throw down the field and to throw accurately and to do it like in a way that he really hasn't done this year. And they just don't have that in them. Narratively, I understand why people think this can go the way of the Packers or even go the way of the Lions, but I want to take those out of it because narrative is something we write after the fact. It's something that we make fit after the fact. We throw out the bad scripts. One of my teachers, one of the guys who helped mentors in my life, Rob Parker, would always tell me he'd go into any game before the game has even started, and he'd have 3 different stories for each team, so 6 total, 3 narratives if a team wins, 3 narratives if a team loses. He was always prepared for it. But that means no matter what he writes, 5 stories are dying on the vine and being cast to the pits of left of being forgotten forever. And that's why I always resist the narrative pull of these kind of games, because yes, national people are starting to hype this up as being the big moment. Are the Lions, is this too big of a moment for the Lions? Is this Aaron Rodgers' destiny to go back to the playoffs again? That can change on a dime. That can absolutely change on a dime. All that matters right in front of you is the matchup.
And I think with this particular matchup, Jared Goff has been very good with not turning the ball over lately. I think he only has a handful of picks.
He has not had an interception. He has not had an interception in the last 8 games.
So I think that goes back. Is that since the Green Bay game or since right after it? A couple of games after it. But the Packers over these last 4 games on their winning streak, they're plus 11 in the turnover differential category. And especially when you look at their turnovers, I believe it's 2 Rodgers interceptions. One of them came in Miami. And then the defense got the ball right back. And I think the exact same thing happened the LA Rams game, or maybe I have that one flipped where it's the Rams, Baker threw a pick and then Rodgers threw another one. I think when it comes down to holding on to the ball, the Packers have been very good with that lately. And I think that the Packers defense has been extremely opportunistic when it comes to turnovers on these last ones. Like Kirk Cousins threw 3 interceptions and had a fumble. The Dolphins game, yes, Tua was concussed, but they still got 3 picks and also forced a fumble on Raheem Mostert. I think that with how their defense has been trending, whether it's luck or skill or they finally figured it out, whatever it is, the Packers defense has been clicking lately ever since that Eagles game. They really, granted, again, we talked about their competition in those 4 games earlier, Bears, Rams, Dolphins, Vikings, and it's not super great, but the Packers, what killed them last season was special teams. And really what you can say won them the game against the Vikings, or if not won them, at least put them in fantastic position to win, was their special teams. Yeah, they had the block punt, but they also had the kick return. Keyshawn Nixon has been fantastic this year. I think he's leading the NFL in kick return yards, and he's only been returning kicks so far this year since I think around week 10-ish, maybe not week 10, week 9 sounds about right, in that Detroit game potentially. And he has, I think he has 95 plus kick return yards in 7 straight games. And even Mason Crosby, who I had zero faith in making a 56-yard field goal, went out there and made a 56-yard field goal. Yes, and off the crossbar, but I didn't think he had that in his arsenal. I think that the Packers special teams being much improved from what they were last year and even earlier this season with taking Amari Rodgers off of punt returns, who, you know, had a handful of fumbles this year, had a bunch of fumbles last year. Keyshawn Nixon gives them the ability to start their drives instead of being on, you know, just taking the touchback on either a punt or a kickoff and being at either the 25 or the 20, gives them the ability to start in opponent territory, gives them the ability, like they did against the Dolphins, their first offensive drive. Yeah, they didn't turn it into points, but they started the drive on the Dolphins 6-yard line. Aaron Rodgers, before he even had 2 drives on offense, their team was up 14-3 because they got a pick 6 and they also wound up getting the kick return for the touchdown. I think that with how the team has been trending lately, and again, Rodgers has not been playing well, and maybe that is, on a Packers fan side of things, maybe that is a good thing, that they're not just having to ride the hot arm of Aaron Rodgers like 2016 or, you know, 2020, you know, all of these years that they've just like, it's like, all right, come save us. Maybe it is a good thing for the Packers that where their faith lies in their team isn't on Aaron Rodgers, and having Aaron Rodgers as a backup plan if the running game's not going well seems like it could be a good thing. Again, he played pretty putrid versus Detroit earlier this year with the 3 interceptions, but I think that with what he was working with, I don't want to say he played good. I don't even want to say he played okay or he played bad. But I think that the 3 interceptions, one of them was a fantastic play by Kirby Joseph, I believe, undercutting a throw to Tanyan. But some of the other ones, they felt a little flukish. I don't think that that's going to happen again. And yeah, he hasn't been superhero back-to-back MVP Aaron Rodgers, but I think that this is a game where he's going to show up because he's going to have all of his weapons. He's going to have his guys. He's going to be at home. Like he just is going to have a lot of these things that's going to make him feel comfortable. It's not the same offensive weapons around him that he had in that Detroit, or towards the middle to end of that Detroit game. I think that their rush offense, you highlighted a lot of, you know, games where the Lions were able to slow down the run. And I believe that, you know, including that Packers game where Aaron Rodgers was the leading rusher with 4 rushes for 40 yards, one of them coming on I think it was a 3rd and 17, which was a delay of game. I will say that. It was 100% a delay of game. But I think that their run game and then the defense turning it around and special teams just not being the worst is what eventually would give them the edge in this game.
I think at some point you do need your quarterback to make those throws. It's something that I've wondered about for a while with Jared Goff. It is nice when you don't have to rely on your quarterback, but in this league at some point, maybe it's not this game or at any other point, you are going to need to rely on your quarterback. There's a very few teams that have been able to do a lot in the NFL without that. I think we're with the new offensive schemes coming out that does change that. What am I looking for? What's the word I'm looking for? They changed that calculus a little bit, but not in what I'm seeing out of the Packers. in that regard. I think Aaron Rodgers struggling cannot be spun in any good way for the Packers. Maybe they get through this game. I don't know. Maybe it is Lambeau. Maybe it is the home field advantage. Maybe it is, the Lions banged up on secondary a little bit too much to really stop that. But at some point, that Reaper will come due. And I think for the Packers, it's not this story can't end well for them. It just can't. There's too many other beasts in the NFC, and if they don't fall to the Lions on Sunday, then how are you going to get over the Eagles? How are you going to get over the 49ers? Like, it just there's so many questions. How are you going to get over the Cowboys? There's so many questions to which I don't think the Packers really have answers. Now, granted, I'd still take either the Lions or the Packers in the playoffs over the Seahawks at this point. I think most of the country prefer the Lions or the Packers over the Seahawks in this in the playoffs. But I don't, neither of these teams, I think, be it the Lions, who have too many holes, who are too flawed on one side, nor the Packers, who their greatest asset is seemingly more interested in snorting. Do you snort ayahuasca? I don't think you snort ayahuasca. Whatever. He's such a damn idiot. He probably would try to snort it too, and then get another henna tattoo and talk about how he's got his third eye open while denying that vaccines work. He's such a goddamn idiot, and I can't wait for him to be gone. I'm sorry. Like this guy's a chump. He's a chump. He's a loser. I can't even say the word I want to say in my native tongue because I will be accused of horrible things if I say it about him. So just all the nasty kind of curses my grandmother would throw out belong to Aaron Rodgers at this point. Hate really does feed the dog.
And on that positive note, Chris, where can they find you on social media?
At Chris Perfett on Twitter is where you find me. At Pride of Detroit for the Pride of Detroit podcast. We're live on Twitch after every game, and we usually post our schedule on at Pride of Detroit. I also work over at Fox Sports Radio on weekend evenings. I do some soccer updates here and there too, but I'm mostly there on a technical role. But I'm all over the place. Mostly the POD cast has been my baby, and we've been going for about, what is this? Is it going to be year 8? Year 8? Yeah, year 8. Damn. I'm going to get old. I'm going to feel old real quick.
There you go. All of his links, including his Twitter, the Pride of Detroit Twitter, and then the Pride of Detroit website are all going to be in the description for you. So if you want to check him out, please do so. He's probably, I would say, not that I know a whole lot of other Detroit writers, but you're my favorite, I would say.
I haven't written in forever is the only thing. I'm mostly just doing radio and podcasts at this point. I do need to get back to doing some more writing. But yeah, this has been a year where it's just all been audio for me. Mostly so I can jump on a post-game stream with everyone on Twitch, throw on a luchador mask, and everyone can donate donations as I just take tequila shots.
There you go. If you want to find that out too, again, look at all of his links. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.